Roads and Maritime Services is responsible for the delivery and maintenance of safe roads to enable efficient journeys across the state. The agency is equally responsible for effectively managing risks that can arise from road building that may impact on the diverse communities and environment our road network serves. Roads and Maritime's commitment to managing heritage impacts includes both on its own assets as they are maintained and upgraded, and those impacted by new road and infrastructure construction. We recognise the fragility of the surviving evidence of Aboriginal occupation before European occupation and the heritage overlay of the past 2 centuries. There is a legal and corporate responsibility to manage heritage in a culturally sensitive, appropriate, practical and cost-effective manner. It's every employee's responsibility to minimise impacts on heritage through early identification, assessment of risk, consultation with communities and engagement with environmental regulators. Heritage value should be considered at every stage of a project, including planning, design, construction and maintenance. This video will equip you with the knowledge and tools to identify previously unknown items of potential heritage value and to appropriately manage risks to heritage. I encourage you to watch this video and continue to be vigilant in the management of our heritage.
Hi and welcome, I'm Peter Cahoon. Today I'm joined by 2 heritage advisors, Barry Gunther and Daniel Percival. These guys are the Indiana Joneses of the Roads and Maritime Services, and today we're looking at the management of heritage and particularly how it relates to roads and maintenance crews. Dan, let's start by asking you, what is heritage?
Heritage is evidence of our history. It's those things that we've inherited from the past that we want to keep for the future. So it gives us a sense of continuity, but also a sense of belonging to the place in which we live. By conserving heritage, it means that we can better understand our past and our present, but we can also positively contribute to the lives of future generations. When we talk about heritage, we mean both the human past and the pre-human past, so the natural environment. But when we talk about the human past, we often refer to this as our cultural heritage. And it's important to remember that in Australia, we have many different types of cultures.
But Dan, wait a minute, I'm just building a road. Why should I care about an old bridge or a tree? I mean, why is this important?
Look, that's a really good point. Just because something's old doesn't necessarily make it heritage. A heritage item is really something that's got a cultural value or a cultural meaning beyond its practical purpose. So if we take a bridge, for example, a bridge is built to be a piece of infrastructure. However, it might also be an important engineering feat, or it might be a landscape marker, or perhaps mark a point in time. Just think about all the things that the Sydney Harbour Bridge means to people beyond its practical purpose.
Heritage gives us a sense of the past and of our cultural identity. It helps us to understand who we are and where we came from, and also where we're going. And it's not just about the things that we can see, such as bridges and buildings, it's also the things that have been lost or discarded through time.
You mean like treasure?
Treasure.
Well, look, it can be. Archaeology is the study of material evidence from the past, so we can know what people were doing and the reasons possibly why they were doing them.
But look, don't we already know this from history books?
No, this is only part of the story. History, as they say, is written by the winners. It can be written from a particular perspective, and certain stories might fall through the cracks. So, for example, the stories of the disenfranchised or the poor or the common person. And this is where archaeology can really come into its own.
And in Australia, written accounts only go back to the early explorers. And we do know by archaeological evidence that Aboriginal people have occupied Australia for over 50,000 years. It may be something very subtle, just like a very small chip of rock, or it can be something a lot larger, such as an art gallery, grinding grooves, shelter sites. And sometimes the most important thing is just a very small speck of carbon that can tell us the date of when things were created.
Basically, we're never going to have more evidence of the human past than we have right now. Every bit of that we lose is gone forever. That's why we need to make sure that we manage it in an appropriate way.
Yeah, this can be our last chance in some instances, right?
That's right.
Yeah. I'd imagine there's a lot of legislative and corporate responsibility that help guide managing heritage.
Aboriginal objects and non-Aboriginal relics are protected by law, and therefore it's really important that Roads and Maritime Services workers have a good understanding of the diverse heritage that they may encounter. And the main important thing is that they have all the appropriate approvals and processes in place to manage that heritage.
And finally, it's worth stating again that it's a requirement for anyone working for the Roads and Maritime Services on the roads or a maintenance crew, they need to know this stuff as a condition of employment. Now, we briefly touched on the concept of intangible heritage, things like families, storage, traditions and memories. Are these things protected by law?
Some intangible values might be protected by law. For example, the National Parks and Wildlife Act has a provision to protect areas that are important to Aboriginal people, whether they contain Aboriginal objects or not. Also, certain listings under the Heritage Act might protect intangible values as well, such as important views, like views to and from the Opera House.
Look, so far it's all theory. I think we need to get out on the field and check it out firsthand. Well, here we are out in the field, and there's not a lot of road work going on at the moment because we're in the pre-construction phase. Now, the experts are with me, Baz and Dan, and we're going to take you through the key aspects of managing heritage, and this really applies during the pre-construction phase.
Yeah, look, it does. And in fact, pre-construction is where most of the work's done.
Yes, and of course, Pete, not all the work's done out here in the field.
Yeah, look, basically the process is the same, regardless of the stage of the project. So it's first identify, then assess, and then we manage.
Okay, identify, assess and manage. Let's start with the first key component, identifying some important pieces of our heritage. Okay, let's start by looking at this beautiful old dry stone wall. I love these old things. Now, this may have been identified on a local survey.
Identify really begins by the project team looking at heritage registers and databases, and they'll also engage a heritage consultant to go out and do some additional work. And then finally, we'll do a survey as well. So we might pick up some items that don't actually appear on a heritage register.
But I'd imagine sitting in front of a database or a computer screen, you don't get a full appreciation of some of these items. You really need to get out and look at these firsthand.
It's not just about looking, but listening as part of the larger community consultation program.
Yeah, local knowledge.
Exactly.
The locals, the community, might have information about heritage items that doesn't appear on any register or document.
Look, I find all this fascinating. Look, identifying items of local heritage significance. We've looked at the databases, we've consulted local community experts, including our Aboriginal elders who've given us the full value of some of these items. This all happens pre-construction. This is identifying heritage items.
Yeah, having said that, Pete, it is known that unexpected heritage items are sometimes found at the latter stages of the project, but what we know now is actually the known heritage. So what we have to do is move on to the next stage of the process.
The next stage, which would be assessing the value of this heritage. The second key component must be left to the experts, and it's the assessing of these heritage items.
Yes, Pete. And with the known information that we've collected, we try to avoid impacts to places and things, especially of local and state significance.
Yeah, now, look, everyone's not expected to know this heritage. Experts are left to identify and assess it.
As we've seen, we may have known heritage. So we might know it because it appears on a database such as the State Heritage Register or a local environmental plan. But on occasions, like particularly during a survey, we may come across items and we don't know about the heritage values. So in these cases, the responsibility is really on Roads and Maritime Services to investigate their significance before we proceed further.
Very important point. If you're working for Roads and Maritime Services, you are responsible to help identify and assess these things.
Yeah, that's right.
And also, what's important to me may not be important to you.
No, I understand that. I mean, you can look at this landscape and find objects which have real significance.
And that's why we have to objectively look at each thing and assess them appropriately.
So, Dan, this is the part field work, part paperwork.
Yeah. What we'll do is some more research, we'll undertake some investigations, and we might also do some archaeological investigations. In order to assess the heritage significance of an item, we usually compare it with other similar items. So, for example, we might look at whether something's rare or it's unique or it contributes to the landscape. Once we understand that, we then need to consider, do we need to avoid this item? In cases where we can't avoid, we need to consider whether that outcome is appropriate.
So it's a hell of a lot of research, a hell of a lot of data and paperwork and reports.
The heritage reports that we prepare form part of our environmental assessment, and we need this for our project approvals and any permits.
Now, all this investigation and reporting happens on major works, but even on smaller projects, it's your responsibility to be across heritage issues, identifying them, reporting them, and there may be a plan that will be developed to help you through the stages of the work. It's worth consulting your team leader who may be across heritage issues that you need to be aware of. Okay, so we've identified some heritage items and we've assessed them, and that may have involved some local experts and Indigenous input. But now comes a very critical part of the process. It's the management. Dan, now look, for people at the coalface, this is critical, isn't it?
Absolutely. Now, there's really two parts to the manage phase. It's what we do pre-construction and then what we do during construction. And there's also a number of management measures we can have to manage our impacts on heritage, but they really depend on the significance of the item and the degree of the impact.
Baz, I imagine some of these things have to be done pre-construction.
That's right. We might have to undertake an archival record of the building before it's altered, or we may even have to do some salvage work before artefacts are disturbed.
As you mentioned the word salvage, now this is literally a real live treasure hunt, isn't it? What is salvage really?
Salvage is a collection of Aboriginal objects and non-Aboriginal relics through excavation procedures.
You can't collect everything, surely.
Nah, Pete, look, that would be impossible.
Yeah.
What we do is we collect enough for information to answer specific research questions, and it gives us an idea of how people occupied the natural landscape in that time.
Now, on every major construction site, you can have a eureka moment, and I've got Owen and Mick here with me. Now, Mick, what have we found?
We've actually found a stone axe. You can see the edge ground on this end, which was the chopping end. It's then been flaked. They've taken bits off the side, possibly to shape it. And we found all these flakes in situ as well, including lots of smaller pieces which have remains of the ground edges. It shows the method of flaking, striking different bits off the side systematically.
Now, Baz, I'd look at that and I thought, that's an interesting looking rock. But it's much more than that, isn't it?
Well, it's priceless to the Aboriginal community.
Absolutely.
It's Australian heritage as well, so it's very, very valuable. And things like this provide information to the broader community in regards to Aboriginal cultural heritage.
Wow, I love it. You can walk along a new part of the roadworks, a new part of the highway, and just beneath the surface are these rich treasures which, well, basically date our civilisations back not hundreds but thousands of years. Congratulations, guys. That's an awesome find, isn't it? Well, gentlemen, items of heritage significance can be Aboriginal, non-Aboriginal, and in this case, natural, Baz.
Yes, a tree. Yeah, look, RMS tried to avoid impacts on known heritage. This tree here has not been modified by Aboriginal people, but it does have a value to the Aboriginal community. It could be an aesthetic value, it could be a historic value. And also I believe it's got value to the non-Aboriginal communities.
Yeah, tell us about that. I mean, obviously it's a magnificent looking tree and it obviously has significance culturally as well.
Yeah, look, the tree's important for a number of reasons, but in particular it's got landscape value. So it's a really important marker for people driving through town. They see the tree and they know where they are.
Yeah.
But also it's got historic significance as well, because it would have been a tree that was planted at a particular homestead or a particular home. So it really marks a historic point in time as well.
I mean, these beautiful natural landmarks mark our highways, don't they?
Absolutely.
And it's all about avoiding impact where we can.
Where possible, we'll always try to avoid our impacts. And luckily, this is one of the examples where it was possible.
So this is a great example where an item of natural heritage significance was identified, managed, and then they've designed the road, moved it in around these trees, preserve them. Well worth doing. Now, heritage items can be of Aboriginal nature or non-Aboriginal nature. And Dan, here we have an example. Tell us about the story of this old house.
So this old house used to be located about 500 metres down there, which is now a construction site. So the only way we could save it is to actually pick it up and move it.
Pick it up and move it. Now, look, I'm an architect and I'm looking at this old thing. It's not what I might say a national treasure.
Yes, it's also more than the way it looks. You have to take into consideration other values as well. So, for example, does it have a historic value? In which case it does. It was one of the earlier houses in this area.
Right. So this house was identified. Was this the first option to move it?
No. In fact, what we try and do first is obviously avoid. But where that's not possible, which is the case with this project, we have to look at other options. So first we look to see, can you use it for something else? So instead of a house, could it be used for, I don't know, some other function?
Firewood.
Firewood, no, that's a bad example. So in this case, that wouldn't work either because it's in the middle of a construction site. So the next option was to move it.
Wow, okay. And we've managed to save the old girl.
Absolutely.
Dan, one thing that strikes me is there's an enormous amount of work that goes pre-construction in assessing all of these Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal heritage. Do we go to this extent for every job?
It really depends on the project. So it's fair to say that the larger the project, the more work you need to do to manage our impacts. And that's why for smaller projects like routine and minor works, for example, you generally do less work.
But gee whiz, don't you reap the benefits, the finds that we've seen just today?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. Now, generally speaking, when it comes to construction, we're talking about known heritage items. Now, you always have to expect the unexpected, but let's talk about managing known heritage items during construction.
Sure. So as we just discussed, with known heritage, a lot of the work's been done prior to construction. So now our management plans, approvals and strategies would be in place.
Okay, so our photographic evidence has been taken and our salvage work's been done.
That's right. So now during construction, we need to ensure that we manage the remaining heritage on site appropriately.
Dan, the thought has just occurred to me, right? You do all this work pre-construction. I've arrived on site. How do I know? I've just arrived. How do I know all this work's been done and what to identify?
There's a number of ways you can know what heritage values are on site. For example, you might know from your site induction, from toolbox training like we've just had, or even from site-specific training such as Aboriginal Cultural Heritage training. There's also the Construction Environmental Management Plan, known as the CEMP, and that outlines all of the heritage values within the landscape and appropriate safeguards to manage them.
Wow, so even if you arrive on site after all this investigation's been done, there really is no excuse not knowing the heritage value of the area that you're working.
But you also have to observe and implement the due diligence for any unexpected finds of heritage out in the field.
As always, expect the unexpected. Now, gentlemen, correct me if I'm wrong, but this is a fence. But it's not just any old fence, is it? It's marking a very special heritage protection area.
That's right, Pete. As you can see, this is a very good example of an exclusion zone fence. Appropriate fencing, appropriate signage. It's not just about the plants and the animals. This is a heritage exclusion zone.
Now, I'm looking out here, I'm seeing an open paddock. But in fact, this is quite a significant Aboriginal site.
That's correct. Under the legislation, Aboriginal objects and places are protected. So Aboriginal objects and places can be intangible and also tangible objects. In this area here, it's an intangible one, where the Aboriginal community have identified that this was perhaps a battleground between two Aboriginal groups in the past.
Wow. Now, this is the first line of defence, isn't it, on site to protecting an area like this?
Look, yeah, absolutely. And the thing you just have to remember is it's a no-go zone, so no one is to enter this area, whether you can see something or not.
And it's not just inside. You've got to be careful of trees felling and work happening around this area.
Yeah, that's right. You might think you're not going to do anything that's going to cause harm to this area, but you can't be too sure. So just make sure you stay away. So that includes don't park cars there, don't have lunch there, don't fell trees nearby.
Look, I think it's a really important point to make. You may not intend to disturb an artefact, but that's no defence according to the law.
Look, that's right. And there's a significant risk, not just to disturbing an artefact, but also a financial risk. There's a risk of a $550,000 fine for individuals and up to $1.1 million for corporations if an artefact's disturbed without an appropriate approval or permit.
Wow, they're big fines, aren't they? So the site has been identified, assessed, managed, clearly marked and protected by law, and rightly so, a significant site of local heritage. Now, so far we've been looking at known heritage, but I imagine there are those things that crop up. Now, Dan, what are unexpected heritage items?
Look, an unexpected heritage item is any unanticipated discovery of an actual or potential heritage item for which Roads and Maritime does not have an approval to impact.
Right, so look, I'd imagine these would be little things that we find during construction.
It could include things like stone tools or like pottery or glass. But look, it can include larger things as well, like structures or fences or even trees.
So unexpected heritage items, by sheer definition, unexpected, doesn't that mean these things are hard to identify?
Yeah, look, not everyone's a specialist, and we don't expect maintenance and construction crews to be specialists. So that's why they should always contact their manager, especially if they're unsure something that could be a heritage item.
And here we have some heritage bounty right here in front of us. Barry, take us through some of these items, some very fascinating looking things. What's this?
That there would be a grinding stone or a hammer stone. It would go in conjunction with this. This is a very rare item. As you can see, it's very smooth here. It's not a bowl or a dish, but it was some type of plate where they would mix some type of material. Could be a food item, could be an ochre-based thing. So once again, it's very, very rare, very important. And these are some of the items that you could find out there. Different types of material, such as silkcrete, is very predominant in some areas, and Aboriginal people did trade these. So you can find them actually out of the area from where they actually, a large deposit or quarry could be. There's other types of material as well, such as mudstone and banded chert. Now the principle or the idea behind this is the Aboriginal people would actually keep chipping it away, and what they'd do is they'd have an anvil base. This is an Aboriginal axe head, and it's multi-purpose use. So what they'd do is they'd sit it down and they'd put that on there and they'd strike it until smaller pieces of the material came off, and hence you can see the pit marks.
Now tell us about this thing. What is this, a persuader?
What's this?
Yeah, it's a don't argue. it's a bit about where the stone meets the wood. We find axe heads such as this one and this one without the wood because this would rot off over time. This is just string from a hardware store, but Aboriginal people would use the sinew of a kangaroo and bind it, and it'd be like wet leather. So when it dried, it actually gripped hold of it very tight. And hence, it was very important, a tradesman's tool. Ancient heritage and more contemporary heritage here, Dan.
Yeah, so look, when it comes to non-Aboriginal heritage, there's really two categories that we talk about. So we have works, which we'll talk about in a second, and relics, which are what we have here now. So these are all items that have been salvaged prior to construction. So we haven't actually found these as unexpected finds, but there's potential that you could find this sort of stuff around. So when we talk about relics, we're talking about things that people used and as part of their daily lives or their daily activities. So for example, we have here today like bottles, so various ranges of bottles. We have some clay pipes, which are quite common on historical sites. Some pottery, some nails, so some building ware, and also some clayware as well. So this is just a small example of some of the relics that you might find. And you might also find bone as well. So it's quite common to get things that are like refuse, so things that have been thrown away into cesspits and the like, they all count as relics. The important thing is that you can learn a number of things. So it might look like rubbish, and in a sense, it often is rubbish, but you can actually learn a lot of things from archaeological sites, and that's why it's important that you get them prior to disturbance. So these non-Aboriginal items are what we call relics, and they're protected under the Heritage Act. But there's also other items, and they're called works. It's not always easy to distinguish between a relic and a work, but one of the easiest ways to think about it is that works are really pieces of infrastructure. Okay, so this example is an example of Corduroy Road, so it's early historic road base. In this next example, we have a culvert. So this is a sandstone-lined culvert that we might find on country roads. And finally, this was a discovery we found on one of our projects, and it's a cistern. So it's something that you wouldn't know was there, but after some excavations done, it's exposed.
We've got works, we've got recent and ancient Australian heritage right beneath the base where you might be working. Back on site, and imagine this. I've just hopped off my excavator and I've spotted something, and it's a rock and it looks a little bit like an axe head. Now what do, Dan? Do I stop work and call on the archaeologist?
Okay, for all unexpected heritage items, we have an unexpected heritage items procedure, so it's easy. It applies to all roads and maritime activities, whether they're major construction projects or routine and minor works. So there's 8 steps to follow, but the most important one is step 1.
Okay. And step 1, Pete, is to stop work, and then you need to protect the item. Then you inform the project manager or your team leader. Next thing is to establish an exclusion zone. Then you actually need to tell everybody else and take some document evidence, such as photographs.
Okay, so this is exciting. We're at the coalface. We've potentially found an important piece of our state heritage. In this case, it's potentially a stone axe. What happens next?
Well, Pete, what happens next is the project manager or the work supervisor makes a call on what type of item it could be. For example, it could be an Aboriginal object or a historic relic.
Well, Baz, we don't know at the moment, but potentially we're looking at an important piece of Aboriginal heritage.
And what happens now is that the regional environmental staff have to inform the project team. Then they find out pretty much what permits are in place and then what process needs to occur after that.
For step 2 of the procedure, we have to engage an archaeologist and, where we need to, an Aboriginal Site Officer.
Okay, so whose job is that to contact the experts?
It's the responsibility of the project manager or the work supervisor.
Yeah, right. And this is where, like, if you've discovered it, early photos that you've taken can be forwarded on to the experts.
And that's part of the process. It's early assessment, I suppose, by providing that information, and then they can come later on to actually visually assess the item.
Okay, for step 3, we prepare a preliminary assessment and a recording of the find. Now, at this stage, the archaeologist might already be able to make a preliminary assessment based on the information provided by the project team. If that's the case, they can probably recommend that we can recommence works, but at an appropriate distance from the find.
This is when we see that high visibility exclusion fencing, that flagging to protect any as yet unforeseen or undiscovered heritage items.
Another outcome that might happen is the archaeologist or the Aboriginal Site Officer might actually say that the rock you found is just that.
Ah, really?
Don't be disappointed, it's just a rock. But it also means that you don't have to follow the procedure at this point on.
Okay.
You can just recommence with your works once you get written confirmation.
Right, but it's worth following the procedures to make sure that that rock isn't something important.
You need to follow the procedure.
Okay, but I'm hanging on to this idea, right? Don't burst my bubble just yet. Imagine this rock does have Aboriginal significance. What happens then, Baz?
Well, pretty much from here, Pete, it's out of the workers' hands, and it's up to the project manager and the environmental staff to follow whatever technical final process there is.
In summary, step 8 is once we have our written approvals, it's back on the tools. What if, though, it was potentially bones, some skeletal remains? What happens then?
Basically, what you do is you stop work in the vicinity, because all bones have the potential to be human skeletal remains. So you contact the regional environmental staff, who can also take photographs and be able to assess that information to ascertain whether they are animal or human.
Okay, so there's some ambiguity at the moment over what we've found. It might be a tooth, we don't know if it's a cow or a human, but what if it's clearly human remains?
If it's obvious, for example, you've got a skull, then the project manager or the work supervisor, they need to telephone the local police and let them know and seek their advice.
Now, that's not a courtesy call either, is it?
No, until we've worked out the age of the bones, we don't know whether we're talking about a heritage discovery or a possible crime scene.
In which case, they may want to take control of the entire site.
But if they don't, then we still need to call in a physical anthropologist to check the bones and just give us more information about.
Look, there are a number of contingencies here. I mean, these are what we call unexpected heritage finds. I think the basic message, though, in summary is, if you're in any doubt, contact your local environment officer. Gentlemen, I've really enjoyed our excursions out and about, picking up some of our heritage, both modern and ancient. And it's a subject very close to my heart, particularly the built environment. But if I was to ask both of you, what is the #1 take-home message we need to remember? What would it be, Baz?
Well, basically, I want everyone to understand that heritage is very important to Roads and Maritime Services. We have Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal heritage, which we're lucky enough to be custodians of in a way, so we need to manage that appropriately. Because basically, once it's gone forever.
Yeah, and we're right on the cutting face here. Like, relatively recent history, still very important.
Yeah, look, that's right. Heritage is everybody's responsibility, and Roads and Maritime has an accountability to manage our heritage in a responsible manner. We've seen that a lot of this occurs prior to construction, where we've identified, assessed, and then managed our impacts. But it's also important to remember that our responsibility doesn't end during construction.
So basically, for everyone working on site, you need to have a clear knowledge of what's to be avoided during construction, whether it be a heritage building or an Aboriginal scar tree. And these things are identified on the site plans prior to construction, so there's really no excuse.
That's right. And when it comes to unexpected heritage items, there's really only 2 things that site workers need to be aware of. And that's 1, stop work and protect the find, and then 2, inform someone about the find. From this point on, we just follow the unexpected heritage items procedure.
Well, as we've seen, thanks to these gentlemen, heritage comes in all shapes and sizes, whether it be modern European history, the ancient artefacts of our Aboriginal culture. It's very important, from Aboriginal middens to ancient houses to stone axes. We need to preserve this stuff. It's very, very important for not only ourselves, but for future generations of Australians.